Hi, welcome to the latest in IR Magazine's Wednesday Winners video series. I'm joined today by Maggie O'Donnell, Director of IR at Wix. So Maggie, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And so Maggie, you won the Rising Star Award at last year's IR Magazine Awards. And I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about your relationship with your senior management team and how you're thinking about investor targeting and corporate access since COVID-19 hit. And so I know that your management team is based in Israel and you're based in New York. So perhaps we could start off by just talking a little bit about, pre-COVID, how you manage your relationship with your management team, how often you were in contact, and perhaps how that has changed for COVID. A lot of people are adapting to virtual communications and so on, and to some extent you've got a little advantage there because you were kind of doing it previously.
Yeah, for sure. So our entire management team, including the founder and CEO, are all based in Tel Aviv in Israel. I have been based in New York for a little less than a year, but before this I was actually in San Francisco. There's another member of my IR team who sits in San Francisco still. And I actually wanted to move to New York partially because the time difference is a bit easier for me, but also just for personal reasons. And so I kind of got used to being completely virtual and remote back in October. Started working really closely with my manager, who was 3 hours behind me, and trying to just be as communicative as possible. For us, that's a shorter difference in time and distance, obviously, than the rest of the management team, but that was even a hard transition. And it took a lot of Zoom calls and just like constant conversations over Slack just to make sure we were on the same page about things. We had transitioned pretty much totally to using Google Docs for things. So like everything we did was kind of working in sync. So it wasn't like people were off on, working in Word docs that no one could share with each other. So I got used to that a little bit. And then with the management team being in Israel, we had to travel there. We still, hopefully again in the future, we'll have to travel there again, but we typically were going 6 times a year and spending 2 weeks at a clip each time we went. And that was really the key time that we got to spend time just listening to the management team, helping prepare them for earnings and just get on the same page as them. And now we're kind of missing that. So a lot of the communication that we had before was over WhatsApp, over email, over these Word docs, but it's really been a challenge now to continue that line of communication and be on the same page while being completely in separate places.
Yeah. So what are you doing to replicate those 6 2-week-long trips a year? Like how are you replicating that?
Yeah, so WhatsApp is an amazing tool. It's a lot of group text messages. But I think that the biggest thing that has helped us and has actually become a learning experience for us is having more regular earnings prep meetings, starting ahead of time and doing it all over Zoom. We've learned very quickly that our team works better when we can see each other's faces. And when it's a phone call, the only reason it wasn't effective to do earnings prep phone calls ahead of time was because people weren't feeling that in-person experience. And, just engaging with each other and having it be more than just the facts, like having it be a real conversation. So Zoom has been amazing. And now we've done 2 earnings calls like this, and it's been awesome to just sit in the room with each other and just chat and share ideas as a group all over Zoom. It's been a really effective way to do it.
Yeah. When the earnings call is live, how different is that for you? Would you typically be with your management team for the earnings call? And so how do you manage that? I know there are lots of IR professionals who have been, perhaps done 2 earnings calls now in this kind of virtual environment, but sort of wondering how to communicate with their management team during the live.
Yeah, that's been tricky. So typically I'm in the room with them. I'm the one dialing the call. I'm the one managing the list of participants, and I'm also the one who's speaking on the call. So it's like a lot of things that are happening at once, and I can kind of direct them what to do, where to go. And then Joe on my team is standing up on a whiteboard, writing down answers to questions as we go.
Yeah.
So replicating all of that was a challenge at first. But again, we found a solution that I think works a lot better than what we've done in the past. What we did is we had we had a conference line in the room where we dialed into the actual call, but throughout the entire course of the day, we had a Zoom open so that we could all see each other, even if the conference call was on. We had a WhatsApp group where we were texting, and we had what we called a virtual whiteboard, which was just a Google Doc that was shared screen on the in the Zoom the whole time. So it kind of felt like we were all together. We could signal to each other still if we needed to tell someone to answer a question differently, or if something was going wrong. And I felt like it was actually a really good way to go through it. Typically, if you're all in the room together, trying to get each other's attention is distracting.
Sure.
And when you have all these like devices and other ways to communicate, it actually keeps people very focused on what they're doing. So it actually was very successful both times. I feel like it went much smoother than it typically does.
Wow, that's great to hear. And with that in mind, I'm also curious about how you're thinking about kind of corporate access during this time. You mentioned before we just started recording that you market both in the US and in Europe, and so I'm curious. I've talked to some IR professionals for whom there's it sounds strange to say, but COVID-19 has almost presented a kind of opportunity for marketing to European investors from the US, where you wouldn't necessarily be able to take your management team to Europe that frequently or whatever. How has it changed the dynamic for you?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. First of all, you think about just the conferences in the US and having our management team come to the US. It wasn't something that happened very frequently. Once a quarter, we tried to have our CFO come to New York, but that's the only place he would come to. Everything else was kind of too far of a trip. And occasionally we get our COO, and almost never did we have our CEO come out on the road. It's a long trip for them.
Sure.
So at the beginning of all of this, it was really exciting. We were like, oh, we have all these conferences we can go to. We can do them virtually. We can do all of them. Like, we can participate in everything. And it was great for a couple of weeks. And then we experienced the burnout that I think a lot of investors and other IROs have experienced, where, the Zoom meetings just get to be exhausting for everyone. And I think we underestimated how hard that was going to be. So we're still doing it. We're still participating in conferences. We're just trying to limit the amount of days that we take of our management team's time. And we're also not afraid to have a Zoom call where no one puts video on.
Sure.
Just continue to have just a phone call, over the computer. So it's been an interesting opportunity for us to get our management team more exposed to investors in the US.
Mm-hmm.
But we just need to be careful about taking too much of their time and exhausting them. In terms of Europe, though, that's been super interesting, because typically once a year we would go to London and Frankfurt, and usually it's in December. Obviously we haven't lapped that yet, but typically we don't talk to our European investors that often. It's just that once a year trip. They're very long-term focused. They're not looking for the constant update. But we have actually seen such an influx in the amount in the communications and the inbound requests that we're getting from our European investors. They're reaching out to us. They want to talk to us. They want to do a conference call with our CEO if they can, and we can do it. If there's someone who understands us well, we're more than happy to do that. And it kind of changes the game for us, because we don't have to put our management team on a flight in order to be able to get in front of all of these types of people. Yeah,
absolutely. And we're hearing very similar from a lot of IR professionals, and that's kind of a sort of benefit of the current environment. With that in mind, do you think this is a structure that you will continue to sort of pursue when travel can return and in-person investor meetings can return, and so on? To what extent do you think you'll lean on sort of virtual meetings, virtual engagement when in-person stuff comes back?
I think we will continue it to some extent. I know Joe on my team would be mad if I said that I don't ever want to travel again. I think we all miss being together, being in person, and there is such value in doing something in person, and you miss the actual connection that you would have with an investor. It's really just, when you're on Zoom, it's just about the topics of the day. It's not about the jokes to the side and all of that. And yeah. I think that's still important, and especially for our team, it's part of the culture of our company. And so I think we'll still want to get everyone on the road and do that do those kinds of meetings. But for me, doing more virtual things every quarter provides us an opportunity to just connect with more investors and to meet with the top investors who are based in Iowa, where we're not going to see them on a regular basis. So I think after this is all over, it'll be a combination of the two things for sure.
Yeah, I was joking with someone the other day that, of course, these Zoom conversations aren't an appropriate alternative to in-person meetings. But there is a sort of slightly different kind of almost intimacy gleaned from sort of seeing the insides of people's houses or their, you and I both have like fairly bland backgrounds right now, but I don't know if you can relate. So I've certainly been on some calls where I'm like, oh wow, that's how you decorate your house. Cool, great.
Yeah, for sure.
So
it's been really nice.
Yeah, you definitely learn things about people in a different context for sure.
Yeah.
One final question is, during these engagements, have the topics been different? Has the focus been, naturally, I'm sure you've been talking about and being asked about how COVID has affected your business and how you're responding to COVID and so on. But, particularly when you talk about your European investors and there being more interest in communication, is that on, any different subjects than you would typically get when you engage with them once a year, or how are those conversations going?
They are different. I mean, it's more current conversations. They definitely want to know how the current environment is affecting our business and how sustainable we think these changes are. Wix is in an interesting spot because we are kind of one of the companies that has done well in this environment. We're an e-commerce focused company and we're virtual, and so there's a fundamental shift in what's going on in the economy right now, and I think that has changed the conversation for a lot of folks, and they're looking for signs that everything is shifting, that there's a paradigm shift across the board. So we're getting a lot of long-term focused investors who want to talk more about like the state of the world and where we think things are going, more than just like business churn or like just certain parts of our model. And that's typically, talking to European investors, that's typically how it is anyways. They want to talk more long-term, but it's a much broader conversation than we would normally have.
Sure. Excellent. Well, Maggie, thanks so much for joining for today's conversation. It's been great to check in, and I look forward to hopefully next time I see you, it will be in person.
Yeah. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.